Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. You know, there's a very prominent Democratic politician who voted repeatedly to raise the debt limit, but only when it was tied to spending reforms. He was in the Senate for a very long time. He voted 4 times for a debt ceiling increase, again, attached to spending reforms. It was in 1985, 1987, 1993, and 1997. And guess who that Democratic leader was?
Must be Joe
Wait
Biden.
for it. Wait for it. It was Joe Biden.
I was going to say, must
Amazing.
be Joe Biden.
Yes. Thank you, Chairwoman Delora.
You were going to say.
Chairwoman, I didn't hear you say that. Otherwise, I would have recognized it. Right. Yes, you're correct. It's Joe Biden. In fact, Joe Biden has a great quote from 2004. This was one of the votes that he missed, but he entered into the congressional record, which I'll enter into the record here in just a second. But he said that he would have, and I quote, would have cast a symbolic vote against an extension of the debt limit. Today's fiscal mess, the transformation of historic surpluses into record deficits, is not an accident. It is the inevitable outcome of policies that consistently ignored evidence and experience. My symbolic vote against raising the debt limit would have been a protest of the policies that have brought us to this point and a demand that we cannot change course. Mr. Chairman, I'd ask unanimous consent that the congressional record from 17 November 2004 be entered into the record.
Without objection.
So I just think it's interesting that we have the president saying that we need to have a clean debt ceiling. We have prominent Democrats saying that we have to have a clean debt ceiling. When the leader of the Democratic Party is on record saying what he just said, that he would only vote for a debt ceiling increase if it was attached to spending reforms, and then before that voted 4 times to have debt ceiling increases only with spending reforms. So it's amazing how the Overton window has shifted here, how far left the party has gone. But I want to talk about China. Chairman Fleischman, earlier this month, an Appropriations Committee budget hearing was held with the Interior Secretary, and it was amazing. She admitted that green new energy policies and the rush to a green agenda actually benefit China, after admitting that solar panels and the critical minerals for solar panel and wind turbines come from China. Additionally, I think you were there for this hearing, Secretary Granholm, DOE, doubled down when she was testifying in our committee on praise that she gave to China for how they handle their environment. Chairman Fleischman, is it true that China emits more greenhouse gases than the U.S., the EU, the whole EU, and Japan combined?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Reschenthaler. The answer is yes. It's unequivocal. They're one of the worst polluters, if you will, in this regard. And if I may further say this in support of your position, we're here today because when we are fiscally irresponsible as a whole, as a macro whole, China buys our debt. We owe China. So one of the reasons we're here, whether by Republican or Democratic, for the American people, vis-a-vis the Chinese, our largest competitor in the world right now, is they're winning this debt battle because we are not fiscally responsible. That's why I think we have got to address this in the way that the majority is doing.
Well, additionally, we have to make sure we don't strengthen China by giving them playing into the market share they have on critical minerals. So, for example, isn't it true that China accounts for 63% of the world's rare earth mining and 85% of the rare earth processing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And am I also correct that China accounts for 70% of global EV battery production?
That is also correct.
So, and this could be for Chairman Fleischman, it could also be for any of the witnesses, really, but how do Green New Deal tax credits passed in the Inflation Reduction Act benefit China?
I'm interested in hearing from all of our colleagues, but the reality is, unfortunately, China controls so much of this market. Too many of these indicators, whether it's what you just alluded to or the like, or as I alluded to with the overall debt that they're buying up American debt, and the fact that they're the world's largest polluters by wanting the rest of the world, including the United States and Europe, to play by a very strict set of rules, and they do not. All these indices are pointing to the fact that we are at a detriment to our world's largest competitor.
Thank
But I
you.
would defer to,
Dr. Murphy, you're here representing Ways and Means. Would you like to talk about these Green New Deal tax credits and how they actually strengthen China?
Yeah, I'll go even further than my colleague because, given the illusion that one part of the world does not get connected to another part of the world with pollutants, it now is part of a theology, if you will, that if we have an incremental increase over here, we're not going to pay attention to the fact that the 10-fold, 15, 50-fold increase over here. So our new Green New Deal, tax credits go directly to the Communist Party in China. So we are paying for our greatest adversary. I'm not even going to say competitor, it's adversary, because we're literally at war on every front, on college campuses, intelligence, freedom, etc. So we are funding our enemy, essentially. And for every solar panel or for every windmill or something that we're able to create in this country, and then for every electronic battery that we're able to create or get from China, there is a massive, disproportionate amount of pollution, CO2 emissions that go into the air. And so now we're basically not only funding our greatest competitor, adversary, person or country we're at war with, we're actually funding them to pollute the world and create more green gases.
Yeah, thanks. And just for the record, if you were to take every automobile on the U.S. market today and overnight make it an EV, it would only reduce our CO2 emissions by 1.8%. I mean, this is an absolute joke, and all we're doing is strengthening China. But I need to move on to some comments that my colleagues made.
Mr. Reschenthaler, may I just quickly comment?
Chairman Arrington,
open
absolutely.
it up to the panel. There's an article that says Chinese manufacturers could earn up to $125 billion in U.S. renewable energy tax credits. $125 billion. Now, when my Democrat colleagues proposed the IRA, they said it was paid for, but the tax credit score has gone up exponentially. The score was about $275 billion. Now it's twice that. It could be 3 times before it's all said and done because it's uncapped. A lot of them are refundable. It's just straight cash. By the way, I've heard a lot about corporate tax welfare. 90% of the companies that get these tax credits have $1 billion in sales. These are corporations. They're Wall Street corporations. And also, by the way, the corporate minimum tax that was passed in the IRA by the Democrats, they said we've got to have corporations paying their fair share. These green energy industries are carved out and do not have to, comply with a corporate minimum tax. I won't bore you, but this is stunning how much China owns of the component parts of solar, of wind. It's extraordinary. We have unilaterally surrendered, in my opinion, to our greatest adversary, our energy independence, which is not just the lifeblood of our economy. It is one of the most important geopolitical advantages that we've had to keep our nation safe.
Ranking member, just one second. Can you give me the site on that so I can ask unanimous consent to enter into the record?
Yes, please. ProsperousAmerica.org. I'd like to submit this for the record.
I'd ask unanimous consent that be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Sorry, the lawyer in me was dying inside. I couldn't move on without entering that into the record once it was referenced. Ranking member DeLore.
I just have a very quick comment. I thought we passed the Chips and Science Act, as a matter of fact, to provide $52 billion to American manufacturers to bring back manufacturing and solar panels and everything else. I quite frankly don't know how many of the folks here, I know I voted for it. I don't know if others here voted for it, if we're so consumed by the question of China and whether or not what we're doing in the U.S., we should be doing all of that here. It would seem to me that a $52 billion investment in bringing back industries that in the past have been sent overseas would be a very, very good way to combat an adversary in China.
And if we
Chairman
release
Arrington,
the stranglehold on our domestic supply chain with respect to critical minerals, we could be independent and would have a more responsible way to transition. So just throwing a bunch of money at it and having this sort of Chinese industrial policy mentality, where we're just throwing a bunch of cash and grants and direct pay tax credits, I think it's the wrong approach. We should do structural tax reform with the R&D permanence. We should have business expensing made permanent. That way you're not picking winners and losers. You're giving the incentives. If you couple it with deregulation, which is part of our debt ceiling bill, I think you would see all the above energy production growing like gangbusters.
Mr. Byer, I'll come back to you.
That's fine.
Ranking Member DeLauro
No,
looks
no,
like.
that's fine.
Okay,
Mr. Byer.
Mr. Byer.
Thank you, Mr. Reschenthaler. Just very quickly, I agree with the chair of the Budget Committee that making the R&D expensing permanent is a smart idea. The permanent expensing is a great idea, both of those. But three things I want to push back on. Number one is that in the short run, and I hope it's the short run, we're buying batteries from China for the electric vehicles. But we're also, because of chips and science, trying to build major battery factories here right now. And if we eliminate the tax credit, the incentive to build those batteries will go away. So yes, it's a short-run problem. And if you look at it in the larger issue, I still believe that the biggest issue that we're dealing with is climate change. And this is the bravest thing that we've done to try to address that. The second thing is, and I want to be respectful of Mr. Reschenthaler, but given that transportation generates 25% of our greenhouse gases, if the complete electrification of our automobility fleet, including the 600,000 school buses and all the commercial vehicles, which have a 30% tax credit, has to make more than a 1.8% difference. It should make more like a 20% difference rather than 1.8. And that's a lot. And third, as we fight back against our adversary competitor, China, let's not forget that we're bringing in 200 million packages a day from China to serve our consumer needs. And nobody's complaining about that. It's filling up the stores at Walmart and everywhere else. And let's think about that too, because that's just as big an issue as trying to save our environment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Byer. Your party keeps saying that we have an addiction to petroleum and foreign oil. The real addiction here is cheap Chinese goods. So I'll agree with you there. That's the real addiction. But going back to emissions, like I said, if you took every car on the U.S. streets right now, turned them into EVs overnight, you would have a reduction of 1.8%. And that makes sense because I think the stats you're referring to, just look at the tailpipe out. It's not taking into account the energy that's going into actually charging the EV. It's not going into the battery, rather. It's not going into the CO2 outputs of actually mining rare earth elements. So if you factor all that in, you have a very slim improvement in CO2 emissions. Also, we're neglecting the human costs that are taking place. You're getting a lot of the rare earth elements from Africa where they're using slave labor, child labor. So in a lot of ways, these EVs, I compare them to the new blood diamond. We're back in the 80s and 90s. Let's face it, rich white people were buying blood diamonds that were coming at a huge cost to people in Africa. The environment was suffering. And why? So white, affluent yuppies in the West could feel good about themselves. Fast forward now, thank God we've fixed a lot of the problems with the diamond market, but fast forward to now you have the same thing, only instead of blood diamonds, people are buying these EVs to feel good about themselves, totally ignoring the human suffering that's going on around the world and the environmental degradation that's taking place. But I have got to move on to some comments. A few of my colleagues across the aisle were talking about there's going to be cuts to veterans' health care. Chairman Fleischman, there's been comments that health care is going to be cut, VA health care is going to be cut. Is that true?
No, sir. As a matter of fact, we have been unequivocal that veterans' health care will not be touched, that bill will not be touched, so this will be protected. You're absolutely right. Our veterans will be protected, and I think as we engage in this rhetoric, when we're talking about something as sacred as veterans' care that should be cherished and is cherished by both sides of the aisle, we should be very mindful that we do not want to scare that population who served us so well. So no, veterans' care will be protected, sir.
Well,
I yield to Mr. Chairman,
Thank
thank you. I appreciate that. I will always yield to my former chairwoman from approach.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I think that is dealing in la-la land, excuse me, that if then now, we have seen here that we're not going to touch defense. As a matter of fact, we're going to increase defense. And we are not going to touch veterans because with this proposal, we are looking at $32 billion in cuts to veterans' health care. I don't make up the numbers. So now, if that's not going to be touched, then quite frankly, what are you going to cut? It is going to be the rest of non-defense discretionary spending, domestic spending. And I want to tell you this, that when you do that with regard to veterans, they are not immune from the rest of the discretionary spending. They deal with, veterans depend on housing support, 50,000 veterans through housing choice vouchers, job training, other supports to 4,200 veterans suffering from homelessness, job training programs that affect veterans. So that's what you're going to cut, is all the rest of that. So you really are speaking out of both sides of your mouth on whether or not you're going to cut veterans or not. You just can't say unequivocally that you're not going to do that. You are doing that. Look, be upfront about it. Let's have it. That's why let's deal with the debt ceiling on what's in, and a clean debt ceiling, and then let's deal with appropriations separately, which is what we have always done in terms of a government funding bill. I just want to make one question, which is what we were talking about before. I hope I can garner your support with regard to a thing that I didn't get into the CHIPS Act, but we're looking at a potential executive order, and that is setting up an outbound review mechanism that says to our manufacturers that if you are going to send your product overseas, that you must come before a committee or commission, that you explain what's going to happen. Is that going to get in the way of our supply chain? Is this going to hurt American workers? My hope is that it is bipartisan at the moment, I might add, and my hope is that I can garner that support, because the people who have been the most opposed to it are those very same manufacturers who have the most to gain from that $52 billion that we're trying to provide them to bring back U.S. industry.
Thanks, Ranking Member. Okay, I just want to take it back to the veterans
Yes.
funding issue. I know you had your comments, but it's my understanding that Chairman Cole already entered into the record a statement from Chairwoman Granger saying that Republicans are not going to cut these programs.
Check Section 201. Section 201 of this bill rescinds $2 billion in veterans' medical care. I didn't make up the section. It's there. Have a look at it.
I'll look into it, but I know into the record you have a statement from Chairwoman Granger saying this isn't going to be cut. Additionally, I'd ask unanimous consent to enter in the record remarks from Judge Carter at the budget hearing for the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I just want to quote here. Judge Carter said, "Congress has always prioritized veterans and will continue to do so. I anticipate we will fully fund veterans health care and other programs in FY24.
Without objection.
Thanks. So I just wanted to get that in the record because there's disagreement. Now, finally, there has been some talk about the IRS and the repeal of the IRS agents. We keep hearing from the left that the IRS needs 87,000 IRS agents to go after billionaires. Does anybody have any idea how many billionaires there are in the United States as of 2023? 735. 735 billionaires. So you're telling us that you need 87,000 IRS agents to go after 735 billionaires? It's an absolute joke. It's laughable.
What about the corporations?
They need 87,000 IRS agents to go after small businesses. No. That's what they need them for. Also, if you just concede that, okay, maybe we got to go after billionaires and millionaires, Heritage Foundation found in August 12, 12th of August 2022, Heritage Foundation released a study where they found auditing every single taxpayer with income over $1 million would require only 25,000 new IRS agents. So clearly the math doesn't add up. Again, they want 87,000 IRS agents to go after mom and pop businesses and everyday citizens. There was also talk that the IRS isn't arming up and doesn't have guns. I would like to enter into the record a New York Post article from 16 August 22 entitled, "How many of Biden's new IRS agents will be packing heat and how many of us will they target?"
Without objection.
Thanks. And in that article, I'd like to just point out that according to the article from the New York Post, the IRS is stockpiling or has stockpiled 4,600 guns and 5 million rounds of ammunition. Let's talk about the kinds of firearms. Of the 4,600 guns, that includes 3,282 pistols, 621 shotguns, 539 rifles, 15 fully automatic weapons, and 4 revolvers.
How did they know that?
So 87,000 IRS agents armed to the hilt. I think that's suspect. I would applaud this bill that we repeal the 87,000 IRS agents. I think we need to look more into why the IRS is arming as if they're going into a war. But with that, I'd like to yield back. Thank you for the generosity of your time.
Thank you, gentlemen.